All the intelligence you're hearing out of that side of politics, the kind of renewable grift community, is that there's a lot of discontent about the Teals' performance. You go in there thinking there's an ideology, you think that there's some central dogma. There's not. The central purpose of the Liberal and Labor parties is to win elections. The gripes and really just the opinions in general of individual voters don't seem to matter that much to them. I mean, it's not an election so much about who gets the most votes. It's like an election of who do people put second last? That's the real question. No matter what happens, win or lose, there's going to be an argument inside the Liberals about why the result was the way it was. The Libertarians have done really well of keeping what is a very diverse national organisation on the one message. Jared Rennick is the standout. He's probably the smartest guy in Australian politics and might go over a lot of voters' heads. But I think at least for people on kind of the cutting edge of right-wing thinking in Australia, he's shot to the front. I think this election should put to bed forever the question of 4-year terms, because these guys cannot be trusted. I mean, I hear that the Teals are really struggling with money. I mean, they're certainly not getting the same returns.
Well, that's the most optimistic thing you've said so far.
Yeah. If you want my one white pill on the election is I really think the Teals are going to do badly. And
wow. Okay.
Yeah, I really don't
what
think
do
they're
you
going to
base
do
that
well.
on?
I think all the intelligence you're hearing out of that side of politics, the kind of renewable grift community, is that there's a lot of discontent about the Teals' performance, right? These guys were very wealthy investors who Simon Holmes Court surrounded himself with, who formed the nucleus of Climate 200, were made some pretty big promises about what the influence of the Teals on energy policy was going to look like. Cut forward to today, we haven't seen any of that. I mean, they've had a lot of influence on social media policy, on, human services, on shit. They even get excited about submarines, right? Yeah. But if you're one of the guys who reached into his pocket for 50 grand to go to a dinner with Holmes Court, Matthew Grounds and the Teals in 2019, promised by Alex Turnbull that the whole world was about to change and everyone was going to become a millionaire as renewables took off around net zero, you haven't gotten your money's worth.
Right.
So they're now struggling to go back around, and people are saying, well, I gave you 40 grand in 2019. I gave you 50 grand in 2022.
So who's going to take the Teals? They're mostly former coalition seats.
Yeah, look, I'm really optimistic about Wentworth. Also just because Wentworth is a really good litmus test because it's one of the few seats where the population doesn't change that much. Like the problem with, it's a result of the housing crisis, a result of unchecked immigration. I mean, there's so much voter mobility now, and the parties can track this because one of the few advantages the parties get in election campaigns is because, of course, they're sitting there with electoral rolls. They know who's in their electorates. They have reasonably good data analysis on the back end. They can see how people are moving around. Wentworth's one of those good seats where people tend to go there, they stay there. People who are coming in probably don't vote, and they stay there for a while. Now, between 2019 and 2022, there's 400 votes in that seat. Apparently, someone told me they're all in Paddington. Like, yeah, it's like whoever wins Paddington wins the election.
Well, I'm surprised. I mean, it's where I live, as it happens.
Yeah, well, your vote is very important. You're one of those few people in Australia whose vote actually matters, is if you happen to live in Paddington in Wentworth.
Just while we're talking about individual votes, I haven't flagged this one, but what's the chance of this election being stolen?
I think very low, very, very low.
But I mean, you go back to 2017 when there was 280,000 votes, 280,000 people found to be on the electoral roll that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And nothing was done about it. That was 8 years ago. Is there much margin to rig the vote in Australia?
There really is. Look, I've looked at it a lot. So across the whole, since I started working for the Liberals in around 2003, 2004, and left in 2019. And every single election, state and federal, I did the same thing, which was locked in a room with a bunch of other, miscreants who look like me, digging dirt, doing black operations, all the dodgiest things that happen in campaigns were usually what we would get up to. And every single campaign, someone would come into the office and say, I've got intelligence that Labor are going around, they're taking rubbings off gravestones and they're going through the classifieds and they're forging votes and I've heard every single explanation for it. And over the years, like a few times, once in 2016 and to a lesser extent in 2013 because we were winning by so much, we did look seriously at it. And I think in 16, I took about a whole week and did nothing but look at allegations that had come in. Because, of course, people write them in to MPs. And so we had a list of accusations, and I went through them all. I've spoken to people at the ASC. I've sat down on my own and thought, okay, well, how would I steal the election? Like, if anyone could do it, it'd probably be me. Like, how would you actually go about doing it? For starters, the price of doing it, let's say, and I would not game to repeat how I would actually do it, but just the cost of it is so high. I mean, in the United States, it does make sense. Like, if you think about the cost of stealing an election, the significance of it is such that you could see a reason for doing it, or that maybe foreign intelligence services might do it. Like, you could see, before you even get to the practicalities and impracticalities of how you would do it, at least you can see like a motive. But in Australia, it's completely pointless. Like, what you could take the money that it costs you to steal the election and you could just buy a lobbyist. Like, forget what you want. Like, you could even just take the money and campaign for the guys. I mean, right now, when you look at how badly they're campaigning, like, if you really want the Liberals to get elected, you're better off not donating to them and just going to a marketing company and doing a campaign yourself. There are so many other options. The idea of actually doing it, the infrastructure required, the expenditure, and then the back-end risk. I mean, I think stealing an election, like vote tampering, I believe in the Federal Crimes Act, is like up the front with treason. So, you know, the consequences are quite profound. Yeah. The chances of it happening are so low. I have no doubt.
Mean, you said last time that it comes down to somewhere between 10 and 21 seats.
Yeah.
And if you have fallen off the back of a truck a list of names in one of those seats that is on a particular knife edge.
Yeah.
That are names of people that don't exist but apparently live in the electorate, then you could go around on the day and pick up. You're saying Wentworth comes down to 400.
Yeah, I mean, you could, but there's one big problem, which is that the ASC audit.
The AEC audit?
The ASC audit, they audit the rolls. Right. So the ASC can actually detect if people have voted twice. So No, but I'm saying if there are, say for example, there are 400 names that you know are people that don't exist on the roll in Wentworth, then you could, using those 400 names, one person voting using those 400 names on the day could swing their result. But that would get picked up by ASC auditing afterwards as well, because the ASC are going to figure out how many people should have voted and how many people did vote. But the
ASC is not doing anything about these people who are on the roll who shouldn't be. They haven't done anything.
Oh, right, I see what you mean. I mean, yeah, if you could figure that out, and you could figure it out in one seat, I guess. But I mean, the chances of... I mean, look, think about this, right? These guys can't even get through a single press conference without fucking it up.
Well, that is incredibly reassuring.
Yes. Look, I'll tell you one thing I can absolutely rule out: either of the parties ever doing it. I did certainly have suspicions that at various points throughout Australian history, I think there is evidence that the unions, particularly the CFMEU, have engaged in it, and they've done it through bussing people around and getting people to vote at multiple booths, and they get away with it because the ASC audits, they don't audit them all at once. There is a chance some stuff can't be picked up. There's also plenty of evidence throughout history of the unions just cheating on their own ballots inside their own organisations, which are also audited by the ASC. So, but I think that's one of the reasons why the ASC's probably learned about all the ways you could do it is just by watching what the unions used to do. Yeah. So I don't think there's that much chance of it happening. I think the biggest example of voter tampering was simply that they've taken, whatever you want to say the figure is, between 400,000 and 1.8 million migrants in the last 3 years. How many of those are on the roll that shouldn't be, right? How many people do we bring into the country that by virtue of our incredibly generous citizenship standards, are now voting for the first time, having known nothing but, you know, the affection of the Australian Labor Party and to a lesser extent the Liberals. I think that's a much bigger problem. And
well, that could be the one factor that swings the election.
And I think that very well could be. And, you know, it's going to take a while to figure that out. I mean, we had the unedifying display of Tony Burke running around, you know, with his citizenship ceremonies in the weeks before. I mean, come on.
They're all celebrating these Indian festivities on the eve of Easter.
Yeah.
It's so offensive. In the middle of Lent, they are, you know, wearing bindis and funny headgear and dancing with Indian people as if that's Australian. I mean, I won't even apologise for sounding racist.
Yeah, it's impossible to have the debate without sounding. It's impossible to have the debate without sounding racist, and they know that, and they assume that that's gonna prevent people from having the debate. But it's getting so bad. Yeah. Like, the fact that we're even having the debate now, like, you've been a respectable journalist. I've been a senior political advisor my entire career. The fact that we can go live and put this online, where we can have that debate and we give zero shits about the consequences. Now, we're canaries in the gold mine on it. It's only a matter of time before you're going to see. I mean, I predict it will start with Chris Uhlmann. I have this ironclad prediction that the day when the kind of house of cards on immigration topples, Uhlmann's going to be the one that does it. He's the only one who ever sticks his neck out on this stuff. He'll go live on TV and he'll say something, and then we'll start to see the whole thing crumble, which is essentially what we saw in immigration in the United States in the last 2 campaign cycles. So we have this. It's
funny though that you're not saying that the coalition will do that. I mean, the coalition was founded on this being an essentially Western Christian country.
But see, they don't see it like that. I mean, I made this mistake when I first started working in politics. It was beaten out of me eventually. But you go in there thinking there's an ideology. You think that there's some central dogma. There's not. The central purpose of the Liberal and Labor parties is to win elections. The Labor Party at least has its Labor Party kind of national convention. Like, it does have like an ideological shell around it, right? The Liberals don't have that. Have you ever been to a Liberal Party conference? They don't sit there doing policy motions, right? They don't have a document that they do. I mean, the Labor Party does this. The Labor Party, every year, they sit down through a very tedious and kind of controversial process where friendships are lost and marriages break up, where they produce a document that says, these are the things that we believe in. And then, you know, at some point, someone will have a brain fart about Israel, right? The Liberals don't do that. The Liberals don't have an event they go to every year where they set this up. They sit down and they figure out what are the policies that are going to win and lose us the election, and which are the policies that are going to prevent us getting donations, and which of the policies are going to prevent us getting jobs afterwards. That's the tripartite calculus of Liberal Party policy making.
That is a very astute and succinct definition.
They're not sitting down thinking, well, I'm a Liberal, a classical Liberal. These are the things I believe in. I tell you what, there are a handful of guys who do that. And like Andrew Bragg, for example, right? I don't agree with anything Bragg comes out with, but I do respect the fact that Bragg is probably the only guy inside that operation who wakes up in the morning, thinks about what he believes in, and then articulates policies based on what he believes in. And that's why Andrew Bragg will never be treasurer. They're never going to put him in charge of any major economic policy.
The one thing I like about Andrew Bragg is how he is so adamant that compulsory superannuation.
Yeah. But I mean, there's heaps of examples like this, right? Yeah. But at a high level, what both parties are doing is simply they're creating a policy environment where they piss off the least amount of people and get the most amount of votes. But there's one flaw in that. I always call it the M&M test with the Liberals and with Labor. I mean, you got kids, right? You know, you do that thing when they're toddlers and you put the M&M in front of them and you say, if you can leave that there for 30 seconds, I'll give you 3, right? And it tests there's a test of your kids' faculties. I think child psychiatrists have kind of debunked it over the years, but people still do it. Anyway, I guarantee you every politician fails that test, right? Because if you're sitting there right now, and we can observe this by just looking at their behaviour, right? they are courting the Indian community. They are putting on the fancy dresses. They're posing next to the 40-foot gold statues. They are bringing more in. They're signing trade deals with Modi. They're watching the vote in key marginals tick up and up and up and up. But they're not thinking about the consequences for the majority of Australians who aren't Indian, who are seeing their wages go down and down and down and down, whose kids can't afford houses, who are just also noticing that you're having people from a dramatically different social and economic culture coming to their country, and there's creating tensions, right? So they only see the M&M in front of them. They don't see the promise of the other three M&Ms, right? And that's the kind of psychological culture of politics. This desire to leave nothing on the table for your opponents, to not plan for the future. I mean, I always find it surprising how many of them do have these massive property portfolios. And I always wonder, it must be their wives who that support them in this. Because when you talk to these guys one-on-one, it's always surprising to learn that they're savvy investors. Because they don't seem to do it in their job.
Yeah, exactly.
If you talk to guys who work for a really good investment bankers, they tend to have really good share portfolios, right? A really bad investment banker does not have a really good share portfolio. And yet we have these guys who are terrible at, picking winners.
What's alarming is sometimes, without naming any names, but I've actually met ministers who don't seem to know what their don't have a thorough knowledge of their own portfolio. Yeah.
Some of them are just clowns. And they're supported by really good stuff. I mean, look, if I had to catalogue, and this is a controversial view that I know a lot of Conservatives disagree with me on, but if I had to catalogue all of Peter Dutton's worst policies, I believe his policy of sacking 41,000 public servants is the dumbest possible thing you could do, because the only reason our country functions is because of good public servants. There is a lot of trash. There are a lot of political appointees and diversity hires, but you can't tell me he knows how to identify those people, because it's clear none of his guys, or even Labor's guys, understand how the public service even works. So you're going to lose good quality people who have been single-handedly keeping this country from going under. We live in almost like a cameralist system. Our bureaucrats do possess a lot of power, but
I had Craig Kelly in here a few weeks ago, and he said something very memorable. He said if ordinary people, tradies and so on, small business owners, knew how many public servants in Canberra were on $500,000 a year or more, he said, these are his words, they'd vomit.
Yeah.
Now, I think...
Most of them are.
Yeah, there's a lot... And, Mark Stein often cracks the joke that a few generations ago, the only government employee you came into regular contact with was the postman.
Yeah.
Now you can't go a day without some regulator telling you what you have to do. I thought, I'm interested to get your opinion on this, because I thought that Dutton was on a good wicket there, because there is a lot of resentment among ordinary Australians about wastage in Canberra and bureaucrats wasting their freaking time.
It would be a fantastic policy if two thresholds were met. I mean, the Americans can do it, and here's the reason why. American public servants don't get paid that much compared to ours. They get paid a fraction. But America has, at any one time, a stockpile of ideologically diverse potential public servants. So if Donald Trump comes in and says, I'm going to put a hot knife through education, through defence, through all these agencies that don't like me, he can do that safe in the knowledge that there are competent, trained and loyal people that are just going to go seamlessly into those roles. We don't have that. The reason these people get paid so much is because there are key senior officials throughout both state and federal governments who, if they leave, it might take months to replace them, if you can even replace them. I mean, the highest paid public servant in Australia, state and federal, is a CEO of Sydney Water. And the reason for that is it's so important. Experts in water, the economics of selling water, because we have a completely corporatized system, they're so thin on the ground. You need to basically be one of the CEOs who can run a multinational company to be able to do the job, and then to adjudicate all the technical aspects of it and everything. You have to pay the guy millions of dollars, right? If one quits, it's a process to find another one that could potentially take a year. There are people like this throughout the public service. We have a very small... Well, I mean, one of the biggest problems we have now is that the kind of culture of public service has been eroded through years of demolishing our academic institutes. Australia used to have sandstone families who sent their kids to ANU to do international studies, who would be funneled into either DFAT, Treasury, or the Attorney General's Department, and they become old grey-haired men with spectacles who run our country and have done for 100 years. We've lost that. And so now we're in this bind of having to go out and find talent and attract talent. I mean, thankfully, the way our system works is that, you know, we don't have just a public service exam and then we send them in and we diffuse them throughout. People apply for the individual departments. So because Department of Foreign Affairs, Treasury and Attorneys General are the most attractive, they at least get the best applicants. So at least you know that
but the culture within them is to not rock the boat.
Yeah. But then at least those people, I mean, that's kind of a good thing in a way. I mean, you don't want public servants coming at you with like zany policy positions. Yeah. But down from there, like there's a reason why the single biggest scandal in Australian public service history that arguably killed 3,000 Australians, the robo-debt scandal, was created by human services. Right, that is a crisis. It could only develop in the armpit of the Australian public service that no one wants to work in. Like, come November, December, when people are sending out graduate applications, you know, kids who've just done public policy at ANU, they're not going, oh, I can't wait to get my job at Department of Human Services. I can't wait to be coming up with new welfare policies. Like, no one does it. And the people who do want to do that are freaks. Right. And they're probably like, you know, socialists who are obsessed with the welfare state, right? So you don't get any good applicants there. So it makes sense that human services sucks. There's a bunch of departments that are like that. Like no one really wants to work in federal education. Federal education doesn't do anything.
Well, like, that's the department I was about to raise actually. Why can't Dutton just say, I'm going to get rid of it?
That's Trump the smartest thing. That's the smartest thing to do with the Federal Department of Education. The problem is, and it's a John Howard Liberal Party problem, is that back when the culture war first kicked off, I mean, people criticise Howard for this, but what Howard was really doing was trying to sandbag our institutions and win. His only fault was that he assumed normal people would be in government forever. So he creates the system that we have now where the curriculum is set by the feds. It's the only thing the feds do. So he thought, right, I'm future-proofing the system. We'll always have reasonably conservative people in the Federal Department of Education, so it doesn't matter if nut jobs start running schools in the States and they decide that, you know, we want to teach everyone about trans rights or whatever, which wasn't an issue back then. I think the issue was actually just history and stuff and like, you know, Judeo-Christian values, that kind of thing at the time. But so he does that back then, and he just makes this wrong assumption about the future of the federal government, right? So the first thing you would have to do is, well, if you got rid of the Federal Department of Education, who's going to do the curriculum? Are we going to give the curriculum to the states, right? Do you really want the Victorian government? I mean, imagine
I mean, that's what our federation was really meant to be.
Exactly.
The federation was really just an agreement between the states to have a common government.
So you're right. So from a federal perspective, we end up with a scenario where a kid growing up in Victoria and a kid growing up in Queensland are going to end up working in the same office with just totally different kind of educations.
Well, yeah.
So this becomes a problem. And so getting rid of the Department of Education raises that problem. Gutting it then raises the problem of we're only going to make it worse, because then if you gut it and then the job's harder, then it's only the real ideologues who are going to stay behind. It's just this catch-22. And
well, the Libertarians have a policy where every parent gets a voucher for education, and that voucher can be spent at any school anywhere in the country.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the best ways to do it. You know, I really do think that we need a kind of fallow period in public education until we sort this stuff out. I mean, then they need more money so they can pay good teachers more and compete with the private sector.
I think education, it's good that we've drifted onto this, and I won't dwell on it for too long, but I think education is one of the most fundamental issues in this in this election.
Well, it certainly is to voters,
Has been for a long time, because our education system has been churning out brainwashed leftists for a long time now. And that has been cementing the sort of left-leaning vote into the nation for a long time, and any effort to dismantle that is being met with adamant resistance, to put it mildly.
But again, it goes back to the Eminem thing, right? These people cannot understand that actions have consequences. The second law of thermodynamics completely escapes them. And so they think, oh, look at this. We've won the culture war. We're in the schools, rainbow flags everywhere, NIDOC week eternal. We've won. And they did that in the United States. The same thing happened in the United States. I mean, I remember being a young kid watching, like, when Fox News first launched on Foxtel. And because I was a nerd, I would watch it obsessively. And back in the 90s, remember War on Christmas, no prayers in schools. Like, these were the things I was talking about back then. Now, the left won that argument back then. But you might win for a while, but there's consequences. The consequence is this seed of radicalism and transgressive radicalism as well that grows and grows and becomes more popular until, like the point I made before, it starts with guys like us on a podcast and ends with the Prime Minister just smashing it all and throwing the toys out.
Well, as an example of that, when you look around the world, there are two options for liberal democracies at the moment. You know, Britain is heading down the gurgler. France and Sweden and Germany, according to some people, have already fallen to illegal immigrants. Trump is the only person around the world who is standing up for his own country and fighting for jobs and prosperity to return back, and national sovereignty. Why are Australian politicians so paranoid about being associated with Trump?
Well, Australian politics is a really very strange kind of matrix of issues, right? Because we don't have a popular vote. So we have a Westminster system. So you're campaigning on all these individual seats. The gripes and really just the opinions in general of individual voters don't seem to matter that much to them, because it's really not how they campaign. They know that a good candidate and maybe an moderate to okay central campaign can patch all that over. So then you've got the issue, like I said before, what do they care about? Who donates to them? Where are they going to get jobs afterwards? Right? So you don't want to be a guy who has said all this stuff and done all these reforms that were unpopular with the people you're going to have to put the begging bowl out to afterwards. That's a consequence of the way the parties are run. I mean, the dumbest thing you can do is let 27, 28, 30-year-olds run for politics, right? Because then they've only really got two options. They have to either be there for 30 years, which means they're going to compromise everything to hold the job, or they're going to make decisions based on where they're going to get a job afterwards. And I can tell you, like, particularly in state politics, these guys don't get good jobs. I mean, it's funny, Nat Smith, so we were talking about Ben Britton, the guy who got axed from Whitlam. They've replaced him with Nat Smith. Nat's a really good friend of mine. He was one of the only guys who got a job out of the last New South Wales state election. He lost his seat. He was a member for Wallandilly. He lost it. He walked straight into a pretty good job as the head of the peak body for plumbers, because he's a former tradie. He was the only guy out of everyone who quit, who within 12 months, not a week, 12 months, had a salaried job, right?
Wow.
You look through the rest of the front bench, I mean, everyone else, maybe they go on a board. They start a consultancy, which many of them deeply regret. As a consultant, it's not for everyone. Nat was the only guy who got a job. They don't get jobs, right? Wow. And they start young, and then their only choice is to stay. So this is one of the core things that contributes to how bad politics is. The best candidate's probably a 60-year-old guy, right? If you've retired, if you've got a house, you've got a nest egg, you've got your superannuation, you're going to be a fantastic politician.
Yeah.
You don't owe anyone anything.
And you haven't spent your whole life climbing that greasy pole.
But we don't do that anymore. For some reason, we don't like doing it.
So we talked about earlier about how the preferences are going to flow. Let's just finish on that. What's your prediction for the election?
The two-party primary is going to be a lot closer, because I really don't believe that, particularly with trumpeter patriots, who are, when you look at the rhetoric coming out of trumpeter patriots, One Nation, they are talking about keeping Albanese out. I think there'll be some persuasion there with their voters about putting Albanese or the Greens last with Dutton above them. With Jared Rennick and the Libertarian voters, however, I think it could be a lot more tactical. Like, I think you're going to see guys really looking at the candidates and making decisions, and that could be a mess for them. So I would predict that the...
So, sorry, just to be more specific, so these are Jared Rennick's People First and the Libertarians. Are these are people running in the reps? They're candidates in the reps.
They've got candidates in the reps. So what's going to matter there? Because they want Senate spots. So they're running.
That's right.
So they're running a lot of reps.
Their main focus.
They're running a lot of reps candidates because you do that strategically to drive up the Senate vote.
Okay.
Because chances are, if you vote in the reps, you're going to vote for them in the Senate.
Yep.
So on those reps ballots, you're going to have a lot of tactical voting from their people. And, if they don't like the candidate, if they don't think the candidate is ideologically sound, which, let's face it, a lot of Liberal candidates are not ideologically sound, it's particularly if you're on the right of politics, you might get unlucky, you get like a left-wing one. It's a grab bag, particularly in Victoria and to a lesser extent in Queensland. They're generally pretty solid here in New South Wales. You might not see those preferences flow. And because the Libertarians and Jared Rennick weren't a big deal last time, they're not represented at all in really the model on preference flow. It's just a guess by the pollsters how they're going to preference. They have no data to back it up.
What's your guess?
I reckon it's going to be a lot closer. I think the primaries are probably just going to go down. I don't think the primaries are going to get any better. But I think it's most likely going to hang on the basis that so many minor parties down the ballot's going to be a coin flip. I mean, it's not an election so much about who gets the most votes. It's like an election of who do people put second last. That's the real question. And
it's a race for the wooden spoon.
It's a race for not even the wooden spoon. Well, it's the second from the bottom. Yeah, exactly. That's what everyone wants. Yeah. So that's going to be, look, and it's just, who can say? You just can't. I mean, I'm reasonably good at this stuff. I wouldn't know where to begin modelling it because the Libertarians ran last time, but they also ran as the Liberal Democrats. Like, there's no like for like there. Rennick didn't even run. I can't remember who he ran for 2 times back, 6 years ago. He was originally a Liberal.
Well, he was still a Liberal, yeah.
So you've got, it's a real mess. Like, I don't know.
Okay, well, just one last question, John. Yeah. And I did ask you this last time, but it may have changed. What surprises will we get out of the winner after the election from either Labor or Coalition?
I think, well, it's a good question, right? If Dutton wins, no matter what happens, win or lose, there's going to be an argument inside the Liberals about why the result was the way it was.
They won't even know why they won.
Yeah, the left of the Liberal Party are going to say, if they lose, they're going to say, well, you shouldn't have tried all the Trump stuff, you shouldn't have tried Doge, you shouldn't have been existed while being right wing. The right are going to say, well, look at all the votes we lost to the minor parties. We need to be more right-wing. And so it's really uncertain. We're Dutton to win. Who is he going to credit with his win? Is he going to say, well, it was... Because he might say, well, I won despite losing all these votes to the minor parties. So then he'll become more left-wing. He might look at the preferences and say, well, I got to keep them on side. So what Dutton... The nature of Dutton after a win is really uncertain. The nature of Dutton after a loss is really uncertain because we just don't know who they're going to pin the loss on. I'm fairly optimistic with Albanese that win or lose, he's going to take a good hard look at the country and say, look, we've made some big mistakes. We've, stuff around the culture wars stuff, the trans stuff in schools. I think you're going to see Albanese become a lot more like Chris Minns if he wins. I think you're going to see that better balance there. I think you're going to see him pull back on foreign affairs a lot because Labor have this very high kind of minded idea of themselves as like the great diplomats of Australian history, which, I mean, I don't really see myself. I mean, Gough Whitlam didn't do a really great job for the East Timorese, as I recall. But,
and he sucked up to Mao.
Yeah. But they have this culture like, we're the ones who go to China. We're the ones who are best friends with Reagan. That's how they think of themselves. And so they kind of deliberately put... And look, give her credit. I think Penny Wong's a very good foreign minister. Having said that, a foreign minister is a very hard job to get wrong when you've got a great diplomatic corps behind you, which Australia does. But I think you're going to see Albo pull back from a lot of that. He's going to see how volatile it is. He's going to look and say, well, look, as many people hate Donald Trump as love him. People are deeply concerned about Ukraine. They're deeply concerned about Russia. They're deeply concerned about China. And maybe the smartest thing to do is to have an Australia for Australians and kind of shrink our diplomatic footprint a little bit.
What do you base that on?
Because that's where the electorate is going. Like we said, these guys are not ideological.
But Albo's an ideologue.
But he's going to win the election without the ideology, right? You look at the things that he's done. It's the compromises on ideology that keep winning. It's not the actual Labor ideology. I mean, he nearly threw the election on workplace reform. If we had done this 12 months ago when the CFMEU were in the news every day, they would have lost. I mean, if anyone starts talking too much about the NDIS, it's going to throw a spanner in the entire campaign because that's as popular in some seats as it is deeply unpopular. So their ideology has done nothing but been a problem for them. And so I think you're going to see more real politics from Albo in the wake of the election as he sits around and says, well, that worked, that didn't, and we all probably need to calm down a lot. I mean, how that'll play with his own second stringers is a good question. I mean, Miles's performance in the last 24 hours on the Russia thing is a disgrace. Like, he's now claiming that the whole thing was Russian disinformation and Dutton fell for it. The story broke in Jane's Information Services, the world's largest open source intelligence agency with 500,000 analysts worldwide. They have more analysts just in the Pacific region than we have in our entire intelligence community. When Jane's says something, you can be pretty certain, at the very least, that their sources are correct. And, a Jane's subscription costs almost $1,400 a year, so triple what an AFR subscription costs, right?
And does Richard Miles have a subscription?
Yeah, well, I read the story, so I knew someone with one, and I said, hey, show me the whole article. And I read the whole article, and then when you read like the Guardian story that got their thing up, their piece on the submarines up first, the planes up first, everyone was only looking at the lead of the story because no one pays for a Jane's subscription. Like, and it's not month to month. Like, you can't just get a month of Jane's. I mean, it's a global intelligence company, right? Their clients are Lockheed Martin and Boeing and shit and governments.
I bet Putin's got a
there's no discount on Jane's. Jane's has only ever gotten in a significant journalism scandal once, and it was in the 1970s when one of the U-2 bomber satellite photos was leaked, and it's the only case of a US citizen being imprisoned for leaking military secrets to a news outlet, and it was Jane's. So
other than the WikiLeaks.
Other than WikiLeaks, that wasn't a news outlet. Yeah. But this is the quality of the content we're talking about, and Richard Miles is saying, "Oh no, it's Russian disinformation." So. Guys like that, I think, will go back in their box after the campaign.
So your assessment of what will happen after the campaign confirms everything you've said already, and that is that this is merely political strategy for both sides. There's no principles or vision involved from either side.
No.
So either way, we're screwed.
Well, look, I made this point. I was on another podcast recently, and we were talking about Dutton, it was about immigration. We were saying, what's the better option? I said, well, one of the funny options is if you think about Dutton's immigration policy and you think about Anthony Albanese's immigration policy, which is non-existent. Ask yourself how many migrants are going to enter Australia over the next 5 years under each government, and the answer is less under Anthony Albanese. And the reason for that is another 3 years of unchecked immigration means in the fourth year, it's going to snap back like an elastic band. The public won't tolerate it. Dutton is going to maybe buy an extra year or so, but with his 25% increases. But it's really just, again, with the M&M thing, it's putting off the problem.
25% decrease.
25% decrease. Yeah. It's just putting off the problem. Yeah. So the only optimistic thing you can say about the election is we have 3-year terms. I think this election should put to bed forever the question of 4-year terms, because these guys cannot be trusted with a 4-year term. And thankfully, we're going to come back to this in 3 years or possibly less after whatever, volatility in markets or whatever economic crisis we have, and we could fix it. We could have a do-over. And I'm very optimistic about the minor parties coming through. I've been proved wrong on Trumpeter Patriots, who I think have done better than expected. The Libertarians have done really well of keeping what is a very diverse national organisation on the one message. Jared Rennick is the standout. He's probably the smartest guy in Australian politics and might go over a lot of voters' heads. But I think at least for people on kind of the cutting edge of right-wing thinking in Australia, he's shot to the front. And then One Nation still exists and will make 70 cents to the dollar out of every vote, and they'll spend it on cartoons. Cartoons,
though.
They're good cartoons, but I don't know if they're really going to solve the housing crisis. But so that's the optimism, is that when we come out the back of this campaign and everyone takes stock, we'll say, well, there's hope for next time.
Yeah.
I worry with a surprise Dutton win that there won't be hope. That with a surprise Dutton win will really contract the right-wing political ecosystem in the country. Will be at the mercy of his donors, like his own migration services minister, whose wife owns a migration agent. Like, that should have been the biggest story in the country.
Yeah.
Right?
In fact, instead they're sacking Ben Britton.
Instead they're sacking Ben Britton for saying that women shouldn't be in combat roles. But so I'm whoever wins. I mean, there's good sides and bad sides. But I mean, I'm rooting for Albanese. Like, I really don't want to live through 3 years of Dutton setting back, any kind of genuine conservative changes in this country. I think that's what's going to happen.
Wow, that's a daunting outlook, but I think I can work with that, because 3 years is not a long time. John, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me again.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.